Chapter 6. The black strike cruiser cut through space with a hunter's purpose, but kept a safe distance from the larger battle barge. Its captain knew his ship was nimble and punched above its weight, but the Tears vessel could take that punch and deliver a much harder one back.
"Get me that ship's ident and status,"
said Annelman to his sensor operator. He turned to the comm station next.
"Tell Lieutenant Corrin to hold the Thunderhawks on the far side of the station and pause our own launch."
Naval ratings churned through data feeds and reports, compiling the information requested. "Sir, Lieutenant Corrin is not with them. He fell." Annelman balled his hand into a fist, then unclenched it. Continued anger and further damage to his command throne was unbecoming of a leader, especially a new one. Silently, he thought,
"This place is cursed. The longer we stay, the worse it gets."
Schooling his mind with the hypno-conditioning taught to all of his kind, he refocused on the immediate problem. "Sir," cried one of the sensor and comms operators, "we are being hailed. It is a Death Watch ship, an ally." Annelman and Tycentus shared a glance. Ordo Xenos was better than Hereticus, but when it came to chapter business, the Inquisition was not welcome. And the galaxy was too big for coincidences.
"On screen,"
said the witness. The bridge's main picked viewer slurred into motion, static washing across it in waves before settling onto a tall, severe Marine surrounded by several other members of the Death Watch. The man's cloak denoted his status as watch captain, while a large stylized eye on his chest marked his authority. His right pauldron and pale skin showed that he bore the gene seed of the Raven Guard. All openly carried at least one weapon or piece of war gear, clearly not produced by the Imperium, evidence of their writ to use the weapons of the enemy against them.
"Brothers,"
he began, his voice clear and amiable rather than the gravel associated with most Astartes.
"My name is Watch Captain Salrus. I did not expect Tumladen Station to be so crowded."
Annelman did not appreciate his tone. He had dead friends and brothers on that station, blood on his hands that needed to be washed clean. His response was terse.
"We have business here. We will complete it and leave. I care not what you do after that." "I'm afraid that isn't good enough."
He paused, waiting for the witness to give his name. He did not.
"Captain, we have business of our own."
He spread his arms, supposedly in friendship, but Annelman knew it was to emphasize the authority of the symbol emblazoned on his chest. He continued, his voice hardening. The velvet glove was removed from the iron hand.
"What are you doing here?"
Annelman had no time for this. While he was loath to fire upon fellow warriors of the Imperium, he would not allow the knowledge of the flaw on this station to fall into anyone's hands, especially those who might probe and investigate them and other successors of the Ninth Legion loyal to the Emperor. Next to the return of Sanguinius, politeness was nothing. He moved to cut the Vox link. Tycentus reached out and grabbed his wrist, stopping him from severing the feed. The Soul Warden spoke, his voice measured and sure.
"Watch Captain Salrus, while the Tears of Baal have the utmost respect for the Inquisition and its agents, you know that our kind are..."
He paused, searching for the right word, the diplomatic word.
"Hesitant to discuss certain things in front of outsiders. I am sure the mighty Raven Guard themselves have their own secrets. All we ask for is respect, and we will give it in return. Perhaps we can aid you in your mission."
The watch captain's smile did not reappear, but he bowed his head slightly, as if conceding the point. He brought his hands back together, covering the eye as he spoke.
"Indeed, I may have a solution to our problem, one that may be amenable to both parties."
He gestured to a Marine over his left shoulder, holding a thunderhammer and a storm shield. As he stepped forward, it became clear that his war gear bore no insignia. A black shield. He was one who had given up all chapter ties to serve the Death Watch in atonement for a shameful act. He was wearing a tattered cape, its original color impossible to discern due to burns and grime from alien worlds. Soul Warden Tycentus frowned, peering at the warrior's predominantly black armor. The red color on the trim and the left arm were faded, but were now unmistakable as the pictures focused on him. He muted the audio and looked at Annelman.
"One of ours,"
said the Soul Warden. Unsure if it was a question or a statement, Annelman decided to treat it like the former.
"It appears so, but who? We have no Tears formally in the Death Watch at this time, not since Brother Monteron. And a Black Shield? What game is Salrus playing?"
"There is only one Tear who that could be, though it is unlikely. He disappeared after a colossal error in judgment many years ago."
Annelman crinkled his brow.
"I recall no such loss. Which company?"
This one.
Tycentus let out a deep breath, his voice taking on a fatigued quality.
And you would not know him. He was before your time, and I redacted his name from chapter records.
Anomen paused a moment before speaking.
What was his crime?
Delaying the return of the Primarch.
Tycentus reached out a gauntleted hand and reactivated the audio feed. The Soul Warden opened his mouth to speak, but the watch captain beat him to it.
I see you recognize our brother here, a fine warrior, and he has survived despite all odds. What do you say? Do you accept my offer to send him?
Tycentus let out another deep breath, and he thought,
To trust one who fled from his punishment, one who lost a demi-company with no gene seed recovered?
Aloud he said,
We accept, Watch Captain, on one condition. Former witness Tarnesh goes alone.
Chapter 7. Given a choice between the silence he endured now or the crash of relentless pursuit, Corin would have chosen the crash. His internal chronometer showed exactly 1 hour had passed since his drop off the bridge, and he had barely heard a sound during the interim. The familiar weight of his combat knife was gone. He had used it during his fall to dig into the bone covering the bulkheads, slowing his descent, but snapping the blade in the process.
Better than broken legs, or worse.
Worse being what happened to Vicon. He hadn't lasted long once Corin found him, his body twisted and crushed under its own momentum from the fall. Not even a space marine could survive the horror that was his spinal displacement and mashed organs. The eye had marked the body's location on his helm's internal map for retrieval later. Comms were still out as well. In fact, he felt like a stalker of ancient times, relying only on his natural senses. Something down here is interfering with his war gear, Auspex included. Perhaps the shielding on the power cores malfunctioned, or the adept formerly in charge of this place was storing some arcane tech that muffled signals.
Not my business,
He thought. Corin still wore his helm, however, for protection, but its data feeds were blank. He leaned into the corner of the next intersection, bolt rifle tucked back into his shoulder. Nothing again. Where were the abominations? He knew at least 2 of them were still alive from the bridge, but Emperor knew how many were down here. He crept forward, sweeping his weapon across an open gear locker, which appeared to be storing cleaning equipment. The cloth mop heads and stagnant solvents produced a unique odor that suggested they actually made surfaces dirtier when used. Corin swiveled towards the sound coming from an open doorway 10 paces away. He padded up next to the corner of the door, angling himself to provide the smallest silhouette possible while maintaining vision into the room. Keeping his rifle pulled back and eyes down the barrel, he eased around the dented frame of the hatch and into the space. It was a repair bay for servitors and a workshop for low-level techs. The smell of grease, cheap incense, and unwashed bodies still clung to it, likely never to be removed.
Certainly not with that mop,
He thought. But human smell means none of those creatures. Then the source of the noise became apparent. One of the servitors was still clinging to life. Corin approached slowly, not knowing if the monsters on this station thought to set traps. There was no bomb or other suspicious mechanism that he could see on the servitor. It must be beneath their notice. The designation on its scarred upper chest was FLP-42 Alpha. He smiled, hopeful. Pivoting to face the doorway, he linked directly into what remained of the servitor's memory drive, grateful that his helm's lower-level functions still operated. For several minutes, he scanned through the unit's video recordings, mostly from a mustached human who leapt up from his chair at intervals, as if startled by sudden noises. Corin skipped through these quickly, not interested in his experiments or surreptitious concealment of ingredients. He dug back further, to the limits of the memory record. That's when he found something interesting. Keeping his right eye lens on the door and projecting the images onto his left, he saw a tall, thin human male. Or that was what he appeared to be. The figure ignored the servitor as he walked by, chatting with the adept who ran the station. Corin caught the glint of steel on the back of his neck. Despite the low resolution of the video, there was no doubt this was the criminal they were chasing.
Chirac.
Corin's face twisted in a sneer, even thinking the hated name. Somehow, he had infiltrated a Tears vessel, which one was a tightly held secret, and stolen samples of gene seed. Worse, the Soul Warden said they were targeted because he knew of the flaw. How such a thing was possible was beyond Corin. He only knew that this man, what or whoever he was, needed to be silenced with all haste. The eye was ready to disengage the link, happy with the information he found, when the servitor began to turn back towards the way Chirac had come. Corin felt his primary heart race as he realized they were in a docking bay, the same one he had so recently guarded, in fact. He saw the mustachioed lab tech again, his back to the servitor and slouched in disappointment with hands on hips, along with a dozen other inhabitants of the station. Then he saw it, the small, private ship with its subsector flag and markings, all appearing normal at first glance.
Hiding in plain sight, the oldest trick there is,
Corin thought as he cut the connection. This was more than he could have hoped for. It was time to find Ajantis and make his way back up and transmit this to the Echo. Chapter 8. Ajantis tried to move as he looked out through broken eye lenses. His limbs were pinned under a mound of rubble, and his head ached fiercely. His jaw and cheek were crushed as his now compromised helm bore the brunt of whatever had hit him. No doubt a result of the pummeling he took from the fuel line explosion and crashing down into this mess. He closed his eyes and made a manual scan of his body's condition.
Good enough. Nothing too bad,
he thought. And knowing this, he heaved. There was a resounding screech as the debris gave way to his effort, resisting less and less as he rose and pieces fell off the top. The pain he felt was intense. His right leg and at least 3 ribs were broken, along with his concussion. His head finally breached the surface like a sea creature coming up for air. He sloughed off the last bits of twisted metal and dropped into a defensive crouch. No attack manifested, but the first thing he saw made him instinctively reach for his combat blade. A human woman in dirty coveralls sat impaled on a water spigot, a dark ring of dried blood soaking through her clothes around the rusted metal. Her face was gaunt and partially decayed, strips of skin half-heartedly clinging to the browning bones. But that wasn't the worst of it. Targeted patches of the bone substance pinned her wrists and ankles to the bulkhead, and chunks of flesh were torn from her skeleton. Ajantis could see tooth marks in the ribs and femurs. The mystery of what happened to the Tumladen station crew was solved.
Dead and devoured. An attempt to slake the thirst. You will pay, Chirac, for what you have unleashed.
When he was sure none of the creatures lurked in here with him, he began prying the useless helm off of his head. He tugged and pulled at it, unable to force it off until he dragged it so tightly over his face that he lost the skin and further mashed his own cheekbone. After waiting for 2 full minutes to ensure he was still alone, he rummaged for his sword. It was nowhere to be seen. Upon Ajantis' accession to the rank of lieutenant, former witness Sarevok himself had gifted it to him. Now, Sarevok was dead, and each kill with the blade was a blow Ajantis struck for his old mentor. After cleansing this station, he vowed to trace the path of his fall and find the weapon. For now, he drew his pistol and combat knife, slipping out into the darkness of the passageway. Moving with practiced caution, despite his injuries, he stepped over masses of bone and crushed bulkheads, following a probable mental map of the station towards the docking bay. Tumladen was remote and specialized, meaning there were no standard blueprints for it, and the bones saturating the entire superstructure made scans partial at best. He passed over several trashed rooms, seemingly ransacked by the occupants as they sought to flee the station. To where and how they might have escaped, Ajantis could not guess. Taking a detour around a caved-in bulkhead, Ajantis made his way to an offshoot lab. He stepped inside, bolt pistol pulled in tight and combat knife in a reverse grip, flush against the sidearm. He stepped over an empty hydration container, a stained mineral trail leading from it to the drain in the center of the room. The corpse of a man lay near it, his lab coat browned with blood that also caked the drain. Enough of his gaunt and decomposed skin clung to his face to make out an expression of surprise. A rubber dropper pump was lodged in his eye socket. Ajantis noted these details with disinterest, though he did grimace at the partially eaten state of the body, similar to the woman he had encountered earlier. A thin layer of dust had settled on the lab tech's workbench. Ajantis could see various molds containing powdered and solid versions of the bone covering the interior of the station.
Did they make this on purpose?
He thought.
Perhaps.
It was the way with outfits like this. 1, perhaps 2 of the principals would really know what was going on, while the rest toiled in ignorance. And then, glancing back at the body, the loose ends were removed in good time. As Ajantis turned to leave, his sixth sense prickled. The room was empty, and there were no sounds. but he felt that he was not alone. His wounded right leg supporting him as best it could, he inched forward towards the door. In his current state, he would have one, maybe two shots at the monsters before they got him. There was no outmaneuvering them with his injuries. The access to the doorway was narrow. He shuffled forward and tried to peer around the corner. 3 feet away, 2 feet, 1. He didn't have time to react as a thunder hammer arced around the edge of the bulkhead, impacting on his chest and cratering his armor plate. The spear of the angel flew back into the lab, his internal organs smashed and failing. For the second time in as many hours, his mass put a large dent into a bulkhead, but this time he did not rise. As his body fought to keep him alive, Ajantis lost consciousness. A figure in black armor, sporting the Eye of the Inquisition on his shoulder guard, stepped into the room, walked over to the workbench, and pulled a small safe out from behind a pile of junk. Chapter 9.
What is that sound?
Korn thought as he paused at a T intersection, the narrow passageway allowing very little scope for finesse. The retching and bestial hacking noises were nearby, perhaps in one of the next rooms if he was interpreting the echo correctly. The bone played havoc with more than just his sense of tasteful architecture. Moving along the wall, he turned the corner and risked a glance into the nearest room. What he saw generated as many questions as it answered. There stood one of the monsters haunting this facility. On the wall hung the 8 bodies of the Tears casualties. Ajantis was not among them, though Korn did not know if this was a good or bad sign. The abomination was vomiting bone from its mouth, with difficulty if the coughing was any indication, and hanging them on the wall like a macabre artwork. The material came out as a liquid and quickly joined itself with the bulkhead, seeming to meld with it. The substance flowed only a short distance before solidifying with enough strength to hold up a fully armored Astartes. The silence of the last hour made sense now. The denizens of this place had other work. Korn checked the hallways behind him, fearing another ambush. He would not suffer this perversion to go unchecked, but he wanted to glean more information before he put an end to the sacrilege. All was clear. He turned back, paying particular attention to any insignia. He could see a loop of white on one black shoulder pad poking up over the bone veneer, but not enough to identify a specific chapter. It was bad enough that Shyrock had access to the flaw and samples of their gene seed, but what if the Tears weren't the only chapter he stole from? Korn was no historian, but he was taught that all who made attempts to modify, improve, or otherwise tamper with the Emperor's work failed, save for Belisarius' call. It was beyond mere heresy, to the level of the traitor legions even, to be splicing loyal Marine gene seed together to create hybrids such as this. Korn didn't need any more reasons to hate Shyrock, but he threw this one on the pile anyway. The monster finished projecting bone material onto Korn's dead comrades, its preoccupation with this appearing to mask his presence. Next, it reached a clawed hand into the soft armor between the joints. Curious, if disgusted, the eye watched as it found a solid grip, one hand in the joint under the arm and another braced on the shoulder guard. The beast heaved and ripped the chest plate off, tearing ceramite and armor gaskets alike, revealing the battered chest of the unfortunate warrior. Then it opened its mouth and started moving towards the flesh. This was too much for Korn. He bellowed a challenge, feeling the red thirst fill him and edge into his vision, narrowing his perception to a single point. He was firing with every step, at first to distract the creature and get it away from his brothers, then with headshots to kill. Whatever it was not a novice warrior, guarding its vulnerable neck and face with its oversized talons and turning into the hail of bolt rounds with its shoulder. It shrieked in response to Korn's battle cry and charged. They crashed together in the center of the room, bone fragments ricocheting off the bulkheads and floor. They bounced off of each other, the creature stumbling and pulling back, surprised at the fury of the Tears of Baal veteran. Korn felt a burning in his shoulder. Something was definitely broken from the impact, and screaming as he forced it to work anyway. The monster regained its footing and lunged, dropping 2 quick cuts meant to disembowel and decapitate in a single assault. Korn threw himself back to avoid the first, but had no defense against the second. He raised his rifle in an attempt to block the blow. The strike ripped the master-crafted weapon from his hands. He saw it crash against the wall, its casing broken and both receivers bent and shredded. It would never fire again. Sensing its victory, the beast pressed its attack, and then Korn saw the red rage in its eyes, no doubt a mirror of his own.
Heresy.
He hoped his brothers could avenge him. Corrin prepared to meet the Primarch. At that moment, with Corrin's vision filled with nothing but a nightmare of human imagination without controls, he heard a crash behind the monster and a familiar war cry ring out. The killing blow from the bone talons never landed, as Corrin saw a thunderhammer rise and fall 3 times in succession, battering down the creature and finally smashing its head into a paste, disturbingly similar to the bone securing his brothers to the wall. The warrior studied his handiwork for a moment before raising his eyes to meet Corrin's. His armor was black, that Corrin could tell, but in the gray of his night vision, he could discern no other color or chapter allegiance, save the eye on his left shoulder guard and the same emblazoned on his storm shield. Deathwatch, Black Shield.
What is going on here?
He thought. Corrin stayed in a defensive crouch with his gauntlets in front of him.
Who are you?
The warrior hesitated for several seconds before saying,
My name
He paused again, as if he hadn't said it in a long time.
is Tarnesh.
He stood there waiting after that and even raised his hammer and shield slightly, expecting an attack. Corrin said,
Your timing is excellent, cousin, though too late for them.
Gesturing to the tears hung on the wall. The other warrior did not move.
You do not know me?
Corrin shook his head.
No. Should I? Come, we must find my brother and call for reinforcements.
Is his name Ajantis? I believe I know where he is.
Said the Black Shield. Corrin's eyes widened.
You found him? Where? Is he alive?
Tarnesh nodded.
He was when I left him. I hid his body as best I could.
He glanced pointedly at the dead monster and then to the Marines on the wall. He continued,
This is my second kill. Do you know how many are here?
At least one more.
Corrin said as he took 2 combat blades from his dead brothers and looked back to Tarnesh.
Lead the way.
Chapter 10. The trek back to the lab was uneventful. Corrin maintained the rear, and Tarnesh led them confidently through the passageways. There was no longer a question in his mind as to where the crew had gone.
Eaten, he
Thought grimly.
to slake the thirst.
Full complement was approximately 100 for a station this size, but there were very few bodies to be found. He had many questions, the final resting place of unfortunate humans being rather low on the list at this time.
Why were the Death Watch here, and where were the reinforcements from the Echo?
He had to trust Tarnesh for now, whoever he was. His hammer was useful in a tight spot. They came around a final corner, Tarnesh pointing into the room.
In here.
Corrin followed him in and saw nothing but a pile of debris. Tarnesh stowed his shield on his back and began removing pieces of wreckage. Soon, a power-armored foot and then a leg showed itself, and then the demolished chest. Corrin shot forward, slicing down with one of his knives on the hand holding the thunderhammer. Tarnesh cried out in surprise and dropped the powerful weapon. Corrin wasted no time, releasing the bloody knife and grabbing his erstwhile ally, bringing the other knife across the Deathwatch Marine's throat.
I know a hammer blow when I see one. Why shouldn't I just kill you, cousin?
The knife was tight against Tarnesh's throat as he struggled, partially blocking his windpipe and making it difficult to speak.
Told. We're no survivors.
Corrin tightened his grip, ready to take his chances dragging Ajantis out of here alone.
I don't believe...
The eye never finished his sentence. The Black Shield dropped his elbow and drove it back, slamming it into his storm shield and hitting the activation stud. The sudden blast of power threw Corrin sideways into the bulkhead, bouncing his head off the steel. His vision swimming, he saw Tarnesh retrieve the hammer and move towards him, unhooking the shield. Suddenly, the Black Shield's head jerked to Corrin's left, and he heard a familiar shriek. 2 talons whipped in, one behind Tarnesh and the other in front, as if the creature wanted to embrace him. The Deathwatch Marine took the ladder on his shield and managed to duck under the talon coming from the rear, but the alien blade caught his shield from behind. It sheared off the top of the relic and rendered it a sparking, useless square. The lieutenant pushed himself to his feet and joined the fray, unsure if he faced one foe or 2. Tarnesh swung his hammer in an upward arc, trying to distract and knock the creature off balance to give Corrin an opening for the knife.
Allies, then, for now.
For some reason, Tarnesh's tactics were familiar, and Corrin had no trouble blending their actions together. They wore down the beast quickly, the hammer providing enough punch to keep it honest, while Corrin readied himself for the finishing strike. It came when Tarnesh connected solidly with its left pauldron, jerking its body around and presenting Corin with its back. Leaping up, Corin jammed his blade into its throat again and again as fast as he could. He felt the impact of the hammer through the thing's body as Tarnesh shattered its torso with a blow to the chest. It slumped towards the ground, dead at last. Corin wasted no time. He rolled back off the beast as it fell, securing Ajantis' fallen bolt pistol and pointing it at Tarnesh.
Tell me everything. Now.
Epilogue.
At this rate, I will never catch you.
Ajantis said as he and Corin sat in training robes, resting after their turn in the sparring ring. They could hear the warp engines powering up, and they were due for another translation within the hour. Their quarry was on the move.
I was trying so hard,
continued Ajantis, pointing to his now healed but permanently skewed cheek and jaw.
You just have the natural touch, a talent.
He winced despite himself, fingering the wide bandages around his torso. Tarnesh's strike had been true, and Ajantis was lucky to be alive. Corin had gone easy on him in the cages. The eye of the angel grinned despite himself. The dressings from the epidermal grafts were removed weeks ago, but their edges added to his scars rather than hid them. The blast from the storm shield had melted away a good chunk of the skin on his face.
"What is it Guardian Caledorn is always saying?"
replied Corin, feigning a serious tone.
"It's what's in our souls that counts."
Ajantis laughed at this, doubling over in pain from his half-healed wounds, then looked around like an aspirant, hoping the dour Guardian was not in earshot. Even with his sword, found lodged in the wreckage of his tumble, he didn't like his chances against the Guardian. The mirth died away quickly, though, as recent events sprang to mind.
Grim business, Tumladen. Did you ever find out what the Death Watch were after?
Corin shook his head.
"No. They debriefed Tarnesh and left. Apparently he's still here. Rumor is he was a Tear once."
Ajantis nodded.
Indeed. One whose name we've never heard.
An alert went off over the ship-wide vox, a mournful chant similar to the one used to summon the Tears to swear their oaths to the Slayer. A call to the fallen warriors' send-off before the warp jump. Corin looked back to his friend as they rose.
"At least we recovered the bodies in Gene Seed. No son of the angel deserves the fate that awaited them."
Ajantis didn't need to answer. They stood and strode out towards the embarkation deck to pay their respects to those who would send them the Primarch. Tycentus paced back and forth, doing nothing to muffle the sound of his Terminator plate booming into the deck. At length, he stopped and turned to face the Marine standing in the cell, a cell for prisoners. Even though Tarnesh was not technically one of those, it was as good a place as any to decide his fate. He was flanked by Keldorn and Cerned. There were 3 Tears left in the company who knew this warrior, and they were all here now.
I sense your need for the ritual is near. How fortunate that you return now after so long.
Tarnesh remained silent. The experience of being back aboard the Echo of Blood, the idea of joining the ranks again, these were beginning to overwhelm him. It was a situation unheard of for a Black Shield. Watch Captain Saulrus told him nothing after he delivered the serum, only to return to the Echo, and that his term of service was over. That had been a month ago, a month to stew and consider.
His weakness makes him unfit for command, regardless of former rank,
said Keldorn, no trace of pity or brotherhood in his voice.
I knew every warrior that was lost. None would follow him.
Tarnesh felt the shame well up in him anew. He wasn't surprised Keldorn and Cerned were still alive. Both were like old tree roots. They wouldn't burn, their hides turned away axes, and generally refused to budge. Tycentus was even worse, as cold as the frost in his eyes. The problem was that between these 3 there was almost 2 millennia worth of experience protecting the Imperium. They knew their business, and Tarnesh was an unwholesome memory.
He did acquit himself well at Tumladen,
Cerned added, his tone neutral.
And the unique liquid sample he provided has already proved most useful for tracking Chirac. A fingerprint, if you like.
Keeper of the Blood Cerned was not known for his mercy, though truth be told, few Space Marines were. Perhaps the Keeper had seen as much death recently as he wanted. Perhaps he thought Tarnesh's blood wasn't worth the effort. Tycentus considered these opinions, weighing them in his mind and adding whatever horrible truths the Soul Wardens learned during their initiations. At length, he spoke, and when he did, his voice was barely above a whisper.
Keldorn, as always, I trust in your judgment.
The Guardian bowed his head slightly at this, and Tycentus shifted his gaze to Cerned.
And you, my friend, have seen more than most.
At last, he moved his attention to Tarnesh, the frigid blue fire dancing in his eyes. According to some, it was that ice which held the rage at bay.
Tarnesh, you will rejoin our ranks, but not among the living. There will be no rituals for you. You will don the black, effective immediately. When your time comes, you will take the mantle of the Slayer and sell your life as dearly as possible. I cannot forgive you for what you have done, but I will send you to the Primarch according to our traditions. The angel will judge you as he sees fit.